lecture is primarily on how sociology actually took birth. So, what is the historical background in which the need for sociology came up? And to understand this historical background, there have primarily been three such episodes in history. One, which is enlightenment, which is right there on your screen, and that's going to be the point that we are going to discuss today. We may also a little later discuss the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution, which brought about a lot of unrest, primarily in France and Britain, but generically speaking, throughout Europe. And that's why sociology is considered to be Eurocentric because its birth actually shaped itself or it kind of formulated the thought processes was formulated in the thought processes in and around Europe. So now the question arises is what exactly is enlightenment? And coming up onto your screen is enlightenment as basically an intellectual movement which was spread from mid 1600s to 1700s in an area which is right there on your screen as centers of enlightenment. And this intellectual movement, which has been captured on your screen, is primarily how it looked around 1740. Now, to understand what enlightenment is, it is very essential to understand how did enlightenment actually crop up. So, what was the reason for this growth of the subject of sociology? Of course, it weaved itself through the waves of enlightenment. But what brought about enlightenment? So, what brought about enlightenment was something which was referred to as dark ages, and in these dark ages, what basically is happening, and we will just wait for it to come on our screen. So, this is the phase that we are basically talking about, where everything from the webs of the spiders to the law of gravity to human emotions, everything was argued to be evidence for the existence of God. So, whatever science actually existed, church authorities they condemned, so clergy primarily, they condemned that science to be mere hearsay, and everything surrounded science or natural phenomena or anything or everyday life, everything was colored with mystery and mysticism. And the most spectacular demonstration is available on the second bullet, which is going to reveal how dark the ages were. And this was basically a kind of a debate that was happening between the decision by the Catholic Church as well as the idea of Galileo. Now, the decision of the Catholic Church was to condemn the idea of Galileo, an idea which was labeled as heliocentric theory by Galileo, which said that the earth and the planets they revolve around the sun. This is what Galileo had said, but the Catholic Church they said that this particular argument goes against the Bible. It goes against the fact that Lord has made the earth stop in the sky. So, Christian orthodoxy necessarily had to affirm against the heliocentric perception, and it kind of brought in the idea of a geocentric argument. And what is this geocentric argument? So the geocentric argument says that it is not the earth and the planets which are revolving around the sun. It is the sun and the planets which are revolving around the earth, and the earth is stable. Why? Because the Lord is living on this particular earth. Now, it was from this particular position, that is the geocentric argument, which the Catholic Church favored and in fact insisted upon that there was a absolute what do you say, a negative conviction of Galileo, and to the extent that harassment was, that punitive measure was so intense that Galileo was forced to withdraw his scientific findings of heliocentric theory and was forced to proclaim publicly that it is actually the earth, in fact, which remains stationary when the skies revolve around it. That's the geocentric argument was what he was forced to kind of announce. But it is said, and I do not know how true it is, that while Galileo, in his end days of life, he did say a statement, but she keeps on moving. So that was the idea that was there, but we do not know how much of truth is there in this or not. So when we talk about dark ages, another very important element, apart from of course the predominance of the clergy, predominance of religion in bringing about insight for everything which is happening in the society, there was a very close connect between the clergy and the nobility. So clergy put across, and since they claimed to be the spokesperson of the Lord, so the clergy said that it is God's will to appoint somebody as the nobility. So obviously now who here is the God? It is the clergy themselves, because God is just a personification that you and I substantiate. We cannot actually feel God. Of course we can feel a power, but then they very intelligently played the role of God's agent, if I may use this term, and it's God's will to appoint nobility. And thereafter, once the nobility is appointed, nobody could question the authority. No one, in fact, could question not only the authority with which the nobility ruled, or the conviction with which the clergy spoke, but people dare not even question their own social conditioning. So, somewhere in the thought process, egalitarianism, or the thought of egalitarianism, was denied to everybody, because it was said that that stratification, or this hierarchical arrangement of the commoners being at the bottom of the pedestal of the society, and at the top being the clergy and the nobility, as if this was stated by God. This is how it has to happen. Now, this is the time when there is no liberty, when there is no equality, when there is no freedom, when there is no thought process, that we have this particular, kind of age coming up, and this age wherein there is this transition from darkness to light. And this is the period which is referred to as enlightenment. Enlightenment is, in short, it is referred to as age of reasoning, where reason was applied not just to the natural world, not just to the happenings which was happening around, like natural forces, calamities, diseases, but also to human world, that is to social conditioning also. So you need to reason now that if you have been slaving your life out, then why is it that you have not been receiving returns, in turn of that much hard work with which you are investing, almost every minute of your life. So to understand this, there was, of course, the first thing, that's separation between the church and the state, which I will come back to. But this age of reasoning led to a lot of questioning. So now people started rising up for what? Rising up to ask the reason for the social condition in which they are actually living. So in and they realized that now there is no place for superstition, because nothing was no more a mystery. Everything was as if a revelation. There is a science, or a rationale behind everything. And so people now started to interpret reality in different ways. They started pushing for different ways of looking at the world. Okay, so this shows that there is a freedom of thought, there is this intellectual curiosity, there's this reasoning that's actually taking place. So till now, the nobility, who were all pervasive and all powerful, under, of course, the shade and the care of the clergy, but with enlightenment came in freedom of thought and expression. So this freedom of thought and expression, it brought liberty to all men. So it was as if kind of a modern battle against absolutism, wherein absolutism is this despotic control, which was partially monarchical in region in reasoning because nobility was there, and partially was also kind of colored through religion because it was actually the clergy who were kind of guiding the nobility to conduct themselves in a particular way. And to add this, the masses were now educated. And this education of masses led to a number of legal reforms. So you have the idea of ideas such as justice, kindness, charity, walking in. So there is sharing of resources, which is walking in. Two very important concepts which are available on your screen right now as the second last and the last bullet means that the second last states constitutionalism. Now, what is constitutionalism? Constitutionalism basically introduced the concept of rights in the sense that even the common man was to be listened to. So rights were to be distributed amongst the entire human race. They were not specific to the nobility, nor were they specific to the clergy alone. They were actually to be distributed to the third estate also, which is the common man. And the last bullet says cosmopolitanism. So, cosmopolitanism is that ideology that all human beings they belong to a single community, and this particular single community is bound by a shared morality. So, what is good for one is good for the other also, and what is bad for one is bad for the other also. So, it was as if, laying apart away from this vertical arrangement wherein there were different standards of morality for different estates. The clergy were excused for certain things, the nobility were excused for certain things. However, the common men were not excused and, in fact, had to pay for the faults of the clergy and the nobility also. But cosmopolitanism erased this particular idea. So then, over a period of time, Enlightenment also scratched to the idea of what exactly is real. Is if superstitions and mystery and mysticism is not what is reality, then the question arises that what exactly is real. So the answer to this, the Enlightenment philosophers said that anything which can be seen and can be measured is real. Anything which is seen can be felt by the sense perceptions is something which is real. So uh, anything which can be felt by the sense perceptions and can be studied, that study would be scientific in nature, felt the Enlightenment theorists. So there are basically three things or three characteristics included under the scientific methodology. The first characteristic is mathematical analysis. So it talks about observation. That's the first criteria. If I can observe a particular phenomena, then I surely can conduct a scientific study of that particular phenomena. The second thing is experimentation. So not just the ability to observe a phenomena, I could be or I should be in a position to experiment over that particular phenomena. And lastly, scientific methodology involves inductive reasoning. So, inductive reasoning is that kind of a reasoning in opposition to deductive reasoning, wherein a researcher is first going to gather the data, then analyze the data, and it is only thereafter that the researcher is going to construct a theory to explain her findings. So, it is not theory first, it is the data first. In deductive approach, it is the theory first, and from the theory you deduce something. So anything which is following or which can be subjected to scientific methodology is something which is real. Going further, Enlightenment talks about rationalization and religion, which actually brought about a shift from, as I just shared, from the mystical way to a concrete way of life. This stimulated a lot of religious tolerance. So, to the extent that The Enlightenment philosophers said that there is no opinion which is worth burning your neighbor for. So, a lot of diversity was accepted, heterogeneity was accepted, differences were accepted. And if you will see, the second bullet on your screen says utilitarianism, which talks about greatest good of greatest number. That was the philosophy. No matter how philosophical the philosophy is, however, the pursuit or the endeavor, the thought process is so very different from the rigidly stratified society, which was so quirkily balanced, wherein it was, despite being the minority, despite being only, say, 1 to 10% of the population of the clergy and the nobility, the entire good was going towards them. But now utilitarianism says greatest good of greatest number. So a lot of balance of power or balance of resources can be seen. So some kind of an optimism and self confidence is being built here. How is it being built? It is being built by the fact that now men were made to realize that, look, intrinsically you are human. And when you are human means intrinsically you are good. Now, because you are good, that means your social conditions is not because the Lord has assigned you to be in the lower rungs of the hierarchy. No. So each one of you have the option, and you need to have that self confidence, that optimism within yourself, that you can actually bring about social progression. So, rationalism induced in human mind to enable them to change their own social conditioning, as if it is all, and that's the fact. They were living in a false consciousness, that, to use Marxian terminology, that their situation is exclusively theirs because that's how it has been determined. So it's like in Protestant ethic, Weber says it's predetermined, it's predestined. But that's not reality. It's far from reality. Reason is the arbiter of all the things. And so, slowly and steadily, if you would have been observing, in the Dark Ages, there was a kind of a parallel between the church and the state. But now, in Enlightenment phase, there's a separation between the church and the state. So you have secularism coming up. You have application of methods of science, not just to philosophy but also to religion. So you have this very interesting kind of a concept called physiotheology growing up. So there were attempts made by science to explain God's providence. Reason, as I told you, was not just applied to nature but to human body. So in terms of diseases, your diagnosis, prognosis, in terms of relationships, that's the societal structure, so on and so forth. And it was realized that there's a connect between cosmology and pantheism. So God and nature are actually the same thing, was the opinion. Now, this is a doctrine which identifies God with universe, or regards universe itself as a manifestation of God. So what this actually brought about, and this is now going to be deep into the philosophy of the thought process, and you will see on your screens that there were these thought processes brought about a lot of revolutions, a lot of democratic, fueled a lot of democratic revolutions across the entire globe, primarily speaking in America, France, Latin America. And on your screen, the sixth theorists, the six philosophers, that's Thomas Hobbes, you have John Locke, Montesquieu, Rousseau, Voltaire, and Mary Wollstonecraft. These six thought processes, or the thought processes which these philosophers had actually kind of nurtured, went a very, very long way in enabling the growth of sociology. And I shall be picking each one of these five in this particular lecture. So that means Locke, Hobbes, Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau. In my next lecture, I would be focusing on Mary Wollstonecraft, because I actually want to do her along with Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine. And So coming on to the first theorist on your screen, it's Thomas Hobbes, and you can see the masterwork of Hobbes on your screen. And this masterwork was titled Leviathan. And he's basically famous for his social contract theory, like some of the other philosophers that we are going to be doing. And this is basically what, let's try and understand the history through which Thomas Hobbes has actually lived. So Thomas Hobbes has lived through a period of political disintegration. And because he has lived through a political period of political disintegration, which culminated in the English Civil War, he came to be of the opinion that all governments are systematically prone to dissolution into civil war. Now, so he had this kind of a, he had converted his thought processes into this, that because he has gone through a phase of political disintegration and instability, so all governments are ultimately going to go into political disintegration and instability, and finally into a civil war, except for one form of government. And that one form of government was a government which was absolute in nature. So he was in favor of an absolute government, an absolute political authority, which he felt would enable a political arrangement amongst rational, free, and equal people. So he says, if you want to have a continued stability, then please ensure that you unconditionally submit yourself to the absolute political authority. And this is going to be the political arrangement. This is going to be the political arrangement wherein the agreement would be such that the rational, free, and equal persons are going to submit themselves to an absolute political authority, and in return, that absolute political authority is going to ensure a continued stability for you. And remember, to ensure this continued stability, you must not rebel at all. Because if you are rebelling, you are questioning the absolute political authority. So you are going against the political arrangement that you have actually gone into. You have subjected yourself to. So he sees his theory demonstrates a reciprocal relationship between political obedience on the one hand and peace on the other hand. Now, Hobbes' opinion is very much unlike that of Locke, because Locke was of the opinion that the state of nature should be preferred. He was anti the subjugation or subjecting human beings, especially because we calling them free. So subjecting such free people, such rational people, to arbitrary power of an absolute sovereign, Locke said, is unfair. But then Hobbes insisted that if you would leave these free, rational human beings into a state of nature, then they are sure to get into a condition of war. And why does he say so? He says, in the state of nature, we all would have equal rights. And we would have equal rights towards scarce resources. Mind you, resources are always scarce. And when resources are scarce and the rights are equally distributed amongst all, there is bound to be competition. And this competition surely would not be healthy. It would end up and invite some serious conflict for those scarce resources. So therefore, that's Hobbes, was not in favor of a state of nature, which is very unlike Locke. However, Hobbes insisted that there should basically be an emphasis on, submission to an absolute political authority. So this is the first theorist. And since we have already introduced John Locke, so I quickly move on to John Locke on your screens. And this is the text that I'm referring to, the most influential work of John Locke's, which is Two Treatises of Government. Now, in this, what Locke is basically saying is that, this idea that God made all people naturally subject to a monarch. He was absolutely against this claim which the clergy had, made when in the Dark Ages. He says, no, not at all. God has not made all people naturally subject to monarch, and men by nature are free and equal. People by nature are sovereign. They are self-governing. And he says every man, and when I say man, I'm literally trying to be gender specific here, because that's one of another reason why I want to do Mary Wollstonecraft a little later, because out of the six philosophers on your screen, which I had shared earlier, there was only one woman. So somewhere or the other, there's this overemphasis on only men as having rights. So anyway, we will leave it at the back end and come back to it. So people have three main rights, according to John Locke. One is right to life. The second is right to liberty, and the third is right to property. He said, and any legitimate political government, not absolute, legitimate political government, is basically a result of a social contract between whom a social contract between people on the one hand, okay, and the government on the other. And these people, in the state of nature, that is, in their absolute freedom, in the state of nature, they conditionally transfer some rights to the government. Now, why do they conditionally transfer some rights to the government? In order to better ensure the stability, in order to better ensure a comfortable enjoyment of their lives, their liberty, and their property. Their three rights. So to better ensure the comfortable enjoyment of the three rights, they conditionally deposit a little in the lap of the government, the legitimate political government. So, according to Locke, the government is existing by the consent of the people. And what for is it existing? It is existing so as to protect the rights of the people and to promote the public good. And a government which fails to do so, and this is very important because this is in opposition to Hobbes' perspective, government that fails to do so can be resisted and replaced with the new government. So, somewhere or the other, Locke is defending the right to revolution, which is very much in opposition to Hobbes, who says that if you rebel and question your submission, your allegiance to the absolute political authority, then forget about stability or forget about peace, because there's a direct relation between political obedience and peace, he says. So a lot of Locke's ideas, they influence the American Revolution, and they also influence the Declaration of Independence. And Locke also defends the principle of majoritarian rule. So he denied that churches should actually have any coercive power over their members at all. And he talked about democracy. And in fact, when we talk about a Declaration of Independence, please remember that this is the time in 1776 when the 13 new states, which earlier were 13 colonies at war with UK, they were together for the United States. And this was a year after the outbreak of American Revolutionary War, where, and I would like to quote from Declaration of Independence, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. So it is not as if the clergy and nobility have given those rights to me. No, I have been created like this as a free individual, and these unalienable rights include that of right to life, right to liberty, and also pursuit of happiness. So, with this, I move on to the third theorist under Enlightenment, which is Montesquieu. And Baron Montesquieu wrote The Spirit of Laws, which basically, is trying to substantiate his opinion against despotism. And what is most important about Montesquieu is the entire 5 years of law. We go through a journey which talks about separation of power, and actually, Montesquieu felt that despotism was seen as a standing danger for any government, and he argued that it could best be prevented by a system in which different bodies exercise legislative, executive, and judicial power. And all these three bodies, they were bound by rule of law. So the idea of separation of power and rule of law actually came from Montesquieu, from this amazing work called The Spirit of Laws. Okay, this theory of separation of power had an enormous impact on liberal political theory, and in fact on the framers of Constitution of the United States of America, and even much beyond. So now for Montesquieu, the principle of democracy, he says, is basically a political virtue, and it's very essential for us to protect this political virtue. And how do we protect this political virtue? The only mode to protect this political virtue is through education. Because it is education, and what kind of education is this? This is moral education. And it is this moral education which is going to ensure something which he calls unnatural self renunciation. I repeat myself, unnatural self renunciation, because it is all about human beings. Human beings are selfish by nature. I would want, there is greed, then self renunciation. So, how am I going to internalize this unnatural self renunciation? I shall internalize it through education, through moral education. So, a democracy must educate its citizens to identify their interests with the interests of the country. So, larger interests should actually become your interest. The country's interest should actually become your interest. So, you have to have censors to preserve the mores, the customs, the traditions of the country. So you should seek to establish frugality by law so as to prevent its citizens from being tempted to advance their own private interests at the expense of public good. And it is for the same reason the laws by which property is transferred should aim to preserve an equal distribution of property amongst the citizens of a particular country. So we understand that the ideas are very moral in nature, and he says this. Of course, he has been a great philosopher of liberalism also. But then the beauty is how he defines liberty. And he says liberty is not the freedom to do whatever you desire, whatever you want. No. Liberty involves living under laws that protect us from harm while leaving us free to do as much as possible. And that enables us to feel the greatest possible confidence that if we obey those laws, the power of the state will not be directed against us. So, liberty is involving living under the laws. Liberty does not mean anarchy. Liberty does not mean anomie. Liberty means living under the laws. And with this, we move on to, I think, the second last slide for today, as I shared with you that I will not be doing Mary Wollstonecraft with you in this particular lecture. So we shall be doing Rousseau, and on your screen you can see Jacques Rousseau, who was a Francophone Genevian philosopher and writer, whose conceptualization of social contract, the theory of natural human, and his works on education, all these three, they greatly influence the political, philosophical, and the social Western tradition. So, of course, it's all absolutely, kind of Eurocentric here. So, contrary to what Thomas Hobbes, spoke about that state of nature would lead to a total chaos because there would be competition for scarce resources, and this would necessarily bring about conflict or a state of conflict. But Rousseau holds that it is only in the state of nature that uncorrupted morals would be able to prevail themselves. I repeat, uncorrupted morals would be able to prevail themselves in a state of nature. So, Rousseau taught that men would be free, wise, and good, free, wise, and good in the state of nature, and that the instinct and the emotions, when not distorted by unnatural limitations of civilization, are nature's voice and instructions to good life. So he felt that it is when the society develops, it is when division of labor comes in, it is when civilization comes in, it is when private property comes in, that actually natural voices or the natural instructions, which he says, which people were in the state of nature following and leading a good life, they actually come to a full stop because there is an intervention which is so much interweaved with civilized kind of a life that it disturbs the state of natural living. So, according to Rousseau, by joining together into a civil society through what he referred to as social contract, what basically happens is that the human beings, they abandon their claims of natural right. So, when they abandon their claims of natural right, individuals can both preserve themselves as well as they can remain free. How? Because submission to the authority of the general will of people. What is government? Government is now, according to Rousseau, general will of people. So now the submission is to the general will of people as a whole, and this is guaranteeing individuals against being subordinated to the will of the others because there is no other. We all are one, right? And this is also ensuring that they obey this general will. Why? Because they are the authors of the law. General will is their own will, they are the authors of the law. So the idea of general will denoted the will of the people as a whole. So somehow or the other, this general will is designating or is kind of identifying itself as the common interest, a common interest which is weaved in legal tradition, a common interest which is embodied in legal tradition and as if existing as a distinct form. However, it is not a distinct form. It is a part and parcel of your own self. It is your own opinion. It is your own interest. So now he says, but once it gets embodied in the legal tradition, once this common interest or general will gets embodied in the legal tradition as a distinct form, it actually transcends the people's private and particular interests at any particular time. So, although Rousseau is arguing that sovereignty or the power to make laws should be in the hands of people, but at the same time, if you would have observed in my lecture, he makes a sharp distinction between the sovereign and the government. So he posits that the political aspects of a society should actually be divided into two parts. Part number one is that there must be a sovereign. And what is this sovereign comprising of? The whole population. And the beauty in this book is, if you ever happen to lay your hands maybe in political science, you may. He says the sovereign consists of the whole population, women included. So I am reiterating a sociological imagination in your mind that how privileged the women must be feeling at that point of time because they were living in a condition of denial. And that is why he had to emphasize here that the sovereign consists of whole population, women included. That means whole population had excluded women. I repeat myself. So, the political aspect of society should be divided into two parts. First, there must be a sovereign consisting of the whole population, women included, which represents the general will. And this is the legislative power within the state. The second division is that of government. Government is distinct from sovereign. And why is this division between the sovereign and the government necessary? He says the division between the sovereign and the government is necessary because the sovereign cannot deal with particular matters like application of law, because doing so would undermine its generality, and doing so would therefore damage its legitimacy. Thus, government must remain a separate institution from the sovereign body. So, when and this is so much again unlike Hobbes, he says when the government exceeds the boundaries which have actually been set in place by the people themselves, then it is the mission of the people to abolish such governments and to begin anew. So, once again, he's talking about the permission to revolt, to rebel. And the last on our lecture for today is Voltaire. And I'm talking about two texts of Voltaire here, which are there on your screen. He basically argued for two things: one, which is religious tolerance, and the other, which is freedom of thought. And he extensively and intensively campaigned to eradicate this pre-existing priestly and aristocratic monarchical authority which was there in the Dark Ages. And he was very much in support of a constitutional monarchy which he felt would protect people's rights. So he said we need to replace this priestly and aristocratic monarchical authority with a constitutional monarchy, and therefore this has been the prime subject matter in his first book, which is there to my right, which is Voltaire's first major philosophical work titled The Treatise on Tolerance, which was published in 1763, in which he calls for a tolerance between religions and he heavily targets religious fanaticism. And a year later comes in the text towards my left, which is basically a philosophical dictionary. It's an encyclopedic dictionary with alphabetically arranged articles, which criticize the Roman Catholic Church and other institutions. And in this particular encyclopedic dictionary or philosophical dictionary, Voltaire is concerned with the injustices of Catholic Church, which he has portrayed and has seen as intolerant and fanatical, as I had just shared with you. And this is also a text in which he espouses deism. Now, with this deism, it's the belief in the existence of God on evidence of nature and reason only, and insisted on rejection of supernatural revelation. So he talks about tolerance, he talks about freedom of press. So the entire Enlightenment period was a period where the thought processes actually were such that they were enabling me to think differently, or actually to first start thinking, because till now I was not even permitted to think because it was thought that my social condition was given. And with this, I would end my lecture, or I would say an incomplete lecture, where Mary Wollstonecraft is still pending. And Mary is pending because, as I had just shared, I would like to, pick up Mary in conjunction with Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine. And for this, I'll be relying on Lindsay Cole's article. and we shall collectively try and read this particular article. I just hope that this lecture would have kind of created a background for all of you to understand as to what were the thought processes which had liberated themselves from an absolutely cocooned dark ages which were existing earlier. Thank you so much for your attentive mode. Thank you very much.